In a rapidly changing world, the future of press freedom is both uncertain and under threat. The rise of authoritarianism and populism around the globe, the spread of misinformation and disinformation poisoning the airwaves.
The thing that allows dangerous political misinformation to thrive on the platform.
And the financial challenges facing the news industry are all major challenges to the future of a free and independent press. Hundreds of journalists around the globe have either been killed or jailed because of their work. I am Maxwell Amunga, a freelance reporter. For numerous journalists, being able to report freely is increasingly becoming harder, and governments everywhere are using more subtle tactics to silence independent media. I want to uncover how this is in and of itself a contentious issue and why we should be worried.
More than 80 journalists from the country's most read news site called Index.
Press independence has come under threat after an Orban ally bought control of this.
The freedom of the press is a principle that has been fought for and defended throughout history. It is a cornerstone of democracy and ensures that citizens have the right to seek and receive information from the media. This concept dates back to ancient Greece, where it was first codified into law. However, it was not until the 18th century that the principle began to be widely recognized and defended. In 1789, the French revolutionaries enshrined the freedom of the press in their Declaration of the Rights to Man and of the Citizen. Since then, the freedom of the press has come under attack time and time again. In the 19th century, newspapers were censored by the government in many countries. In the 20th century, dictatorships and communist regimes tried to control the media in order to control the population. But the principle of the freedom of the press has survived and is now enshrined in the constitution of many countries. In the 21st century, the media is freer than ever before, and citizens have unprecedented access to information.
There is a lot of debate in the West about the free flow of information on the internet. But in China, there is no debate. The government maintains tight control on what people inside the country can and can't see, making the World Wide Web not so wide.
Authoritarian regimes are increasingly using the tools of the digital age to control the flow of information and silence critical voices. In China, the government has developed an elaborate system of censorship and surveillance to control what its citizens see and read online. In Russia, for instance, the government has used its control over the media to wage a campaign of disinformation and propaganda against its opponents, both at home and abroad. And in Hungary, the government has utilized its power to impose heavy taxes on foreign-owned media outlets and force the sale of domestic media outlets to pro-government allies. These trends are compounded by the spread of misinformation and disinformation online. Social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have become fertile grounds for the spread of false and misleading information, which can have a serious impact on public opinion and the political process at large.
Today, the challenge is that everybody can write, anyone can publish, and news is traveling much faster. We are sharing, the technology has made it possible for people to share information wider. So there is a little bit more freedom if you look at it from that point. But the challenge of actually being able to run what we're calling legacy media and making them survive is what is, for now, for me, I think it's the biggest challenge. Because media houses tend to be pushing, they're running for the bottom line. They seem to have been caught off guard by these changes. They have yet to adapt to the changing media ecosystem such that they seem to be scrambling. That is why you see sometimes legacy media, which should, for all intents and purposes, be like the one we believe to be giving us the truth, as close as the truth as we can imagine, or the facts as is possible, are following social media.
The rise of fake news and the use of bots and trolls to spread disinformation are all major challenges to the future of a free press.
What happens to a world without facts? You don't have a shared reality. It's a cacophony. right? And that's exactly what we have right now when facts and lies are identical, when algorithms distribute the lies further and faster.
All these factors combined create a very uncertain future for press freedom.
Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index findings for 2022 are worrying, evidencing a new era of polarization set against a backdrop of information chaos, with deepening division among media within countries, but also between countries at the international level.
The latest World Press Freedom Index has just been published, and it paints a grim picture of countries across the African continent. Reporters Without Borders says that the situation in two countries, Egypt and Eritrea, is extremely bad. Egypt is described as one of the worst prisons for journalists, and Eritrea has the second lowest ranking in the world after North Korea. Some African countries enjoy guaranteed press freedom, such as Namibia and South Africa. And Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria, has a rich and diverse media landscape. But Reporters Without Borders says that it is one of West Africa's most dangerous and difficult countries for journalists, who are often watched, attacked, arbitrarily arrested, and even killed.
My experience is that I've had to flee the country for the sake of my own personal safety. If I want to maintain my freedom and possibly my life, I simply cannot be in Nigeria. I currently live under asylum protection in exile in a country that I'm probably not allowed to name here. So my experience has been completely at odds with whatever it is that Lai Mohammed has had to say. And what I will also mention is that even though we no longer have parcel bombs being delivered to journalists, or journalists getting bullied in the newsrooms by soldiers, wielding AK-47 rifles in their faces, it doesn't mean that Nigeria has a free press in any way.
The same trend applies to countries such as Uganda, where journalists who criticize the government are attacked or kidnapped, while President Yoweri Museveni even described journalists as parasites in 2018. Ethiopia, on the other hand, is making progress. Since April 2018, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has facilitated the release of imprisoned journalists and restored access to 250 news websites. Moreover, the media in Eritrea is under the complete control of President Isaias Afwerki. The government shut down all independent media outlets in 2001. The only independent radio station currently is Radio Area, which is currently run by exiled Eritrean journalists, but its signal is often blocked. Additionally, since 2016, political tensions have been used as an excuse to undermine freedom of information and the independence of the press in Zambia. The authorities have shut down the country's main independent newspaper, The Post, and several radio and TV stations had their licenses taken away. In March, a private TV station was forced to close because its reporting was considered biased. And lastly, Rwanda. Under President Paul Kagame, the press is still tightly controlled. Foreign journalists are often not given accreditation. The 1994 genocide is referenced when the government calls critical journalists divisionists. Many Rwandan journalists have fled the country and work in exile, leading the government to increasingly block access to foreign broadcasters such as the BBC. And this is just but the tip of the iceberg of the press freedom situation in Africa.
To some international news, Israeli forces have shot dead Al Jazeera's journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in the occupied West Bank. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, Shireen was hit by a live bullet on Wednesday while covering Israeli raids in the city.
Journalism is undoubtedly one of the most dangerous jobs on earth. A few months ago, an organization called Freedom House released a survey on the state of the world's press freedom. And its startling conclusion is that it is now worse than it has been in 13 years. Last year alone, 79 journalists were murdered on the job. That was not the record. We had that mark back in 2007, when 120 journalists died because of their work. But it is broadly in line with historical trends in which about 100 journalists are killed each year, simply for doing their job. What about those under arrest? Well, 2017 was on the record high, with more than 250 journalists in jail globally, with the COVID-19 outbreak seeming to set the pace for this retrogressive act and transforming the dynamics against journalists globally. COVID-19 has had a profound effect on press freedom. The pandemic has resulted into mass censorship and a crackdown of journalists in many countries.
How can true journalism be perpetuated even in this era of COVID-19? Yeah. How can now that we've been facing quite a lot of challenges, and so how can that true journalism be perpetuated? How can it be lengthened in as much as these harsh times of COVID-19, which has come with its fair share of our troubles?
I think it, at least in terms of our approach at Africa Uncensored, has always been not to be the fastest one out with content. In a high pressure situation like this, where there's a lot of there's a huge lack of information, at least even at the beginning of the pandemic, as you remember, there was a very, very big gap in terms of what people knew about the pandemic, what newsrooms would tend to do, and that's because they've been created to do that, is really rush to the news cycle and try and produce as much as possible.
At least 387 people working in the media industry around the world had been imprisoned by December 1st of the year 2020. As per Reporters Without Borders, 5 countries were responsible for over half of all convictions. China led the pack with 117 jailed journalists, followed by Saudi Arabia with 34, Egypt 30, Vietnam 28, and Syria 27. While the majority of imprisoned press workers were still men, the number of women arrested in 2020 increased by a third to 42. The report also highlighted the detention of the Australian WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, currently in Belmarsh Highly Security Prison in the UK. Reporters Without Borders claimed that the conditions had become much worse following a coronavirus outbreak in the prison, and that Assange had been placed in de facto isolation. In this regard, what happened was, in the wars that passed, there were generally out of tangible goods such as land, water, and ethnicity, and in those kinds of conflicts, journalists were considered as observers to the conflict rather than participants in it. Therefore, in war zones, journalists were targets. But George W. Bush, the 43rd American president, changed the dynamics when he stood up in the Congress after the 9/11 attacks and said that you're either with us or with the enemy. With this single statement, what George Bush did was that he made the conflict a binary choice. For journalists, that was incredibly challenging because it meant that if you are doing a job and reporting in line with the professional standards of balance, accuracy, and fairness, then by definition you had to go and report from the other spectrum of the conflict to get information. This meant that you become part of the enemy in the eyes of the government. This is not an abstract idea, but an idea that has had serious consequences to journalists globally. This year's Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to 2 journalists. A clear message that press freedom is crucial for peace and democracy. But with journalists increasingly being targeted across the world, how do we protect press freedom? Well, at first, we have to embrace the fact that social media is not a substitute for press freedom. Social media is not a replacement for press freedom because press freedom ensures that journalists can report on the news without fear of retribution. Social media does not offer the same protection to journalists who can't be censored or even banned from platforms for speaking out against the government or powerful interests.
One of the biggest problems in the media in Uganda is self-censorship. When the president told him to leave his family and his wife alone, I don't think I ever wrote an article mentioning Museveni's wife again until I left Uganda.
Additionally, journalism is a linchpin of democracy. Journalism is important in a democracy because it holds elected officials and government agencies accountable to the people.
Presidents, prime ministers, government ministers.
It also informs the public about what is happening in their community, state, and country. And lastly, governments should not tell journalists what news is. This could lead to censorship. If the government is the one dictating what news is, they could easily censor information that they do not want the public to know. This would limit the public's ability to make informed decisions and could lead to corruption. Similarly, it could create a biased media. If the government is only allowing certain information to be reported, then the media will only be presenting one side of the story. Online is where it's at its worst. There is relentless trolling from the audience's part, mountains of misinformation, and the WhatsApp culture that pushes the most divisive content straight to your phone.
The platforms themselves have the biggest role in ensuring that they're not contributing to a polluted information environment, because they are the holders of the black boxes that are the algorithms. They have all the data.
Then there is television, poisoning the airwaves. With the government in control, hundreds of 24-hour news outlets almost studiously neglect substantive stories, the precarious position of the health sector, the epidemic use of substance abuse, and the deep issues unfolding in climate change. Instead, they want the audience to rely on content that ruptures up conflict, that mainly amplifies on the us versus them narrative. This would not only give the public a full understanding of the issues and could lead to misunderstanding and division. The freedom of the press should matter to all of us because it is the cornerstone of democracy. It ensures that citizens are informed and can hold their government accountable. It is a check on power and a safeguard against corruption. When the press is free, societies are more stable and peaceful. A free press is essential for democracy to function. It is the watchdog that keeps politicians honest and informs citizens about what their government is doing. A free press is also crucial for stability and peace. When citizens are informed and can hold their government accountable, they are less likely to resort to violence. The freedom of the press is a fundamental right and should be defended. We all have a stake in a free and independent press.